Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Thomas Pedazzoni, and I will be your host for this new initiative from Bootlin that we call the Bootlin Live. It's an attempt at doing a regular or hopefully regular video podcast to share some of our knowledge discoveries in the field of embedded Linux. So let's see how that goes. That's really our first, so we don't know how things are going to go, but hopefully well. So for this first episode, we have planned three topics to share with you. First, some feedback from the Embedded Linux Conference Europe that took place 2 weeks ago under the umbrella of the Open Source Summit Europe in Vienna. Then kind of a follow-up topic on the Linux Plumbers conference, which also took place in Vienna 2 weeks ago. And then we'll close this first episode with some updates on our elixir.bootlin.com website. That is a popular tool to navigate the Linux kernel source code, but also a number of other important open source projects in our field. And to cover those topics, I have a number of guests with me tonight. Well, it's tonight here in Europe, but it can be a different time in where you live, of course. That will help me discuss those different things. Just a quick intro on Bootlin. We are an engineering company specialized in embedded Linux development and training. So we can help, and we do help organizations around the world put Linux on their hardware by writing drivers, by porting Linux to new platform, by writing device trees, doing Yocto or Bidroot integration, helping with security, real-time, boot time, and many other embedded Linux related topics. But that's about it for the intro, and I want to directly get into our first topic and welcome to the stage Olivier and Theo. Hey, hello.
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 Yeah.
Hello,
Hello,
Thomas.
Olivier. Hello, Theo. I hope you're doing well.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, good. The two of you, well, me myself included, participated to the Embedded Linux Conference Europe, as I said, 2 weeks ago in Vienna. I think, Olivier, you joined us recently. It was your first Embedded Linux conference. So kind of what did you think about the event? What it looked like compared to other conferences you attended in the past? What's your overall feeling?
Yeah, this was my first Embedded Linux conference, and it was actually my first open source conference. It was a bit different from the conferences I'm used to, in the sense that I go to security conferences, and so you tend to see a few things that are a bit peculiar about them. First, I noticed that it had some very corporate vibes, especially in the the scale of it, and in the keynotes. You can tell that the Linux Foundation is a big organization, and that there is a lot of policy behind it. So that was a bit surprising. Security conferences tend to be a bit more ad hoc. They're still organized, but not to this level. And I was also surprised by the difference in topics that you can see, because you have very, very low level hardware, the design of USB-C plugs and the pinouts of it, next to some very high level policy types of conferences, some open source 101, people discussing software bill of materials or SPDX. So very, very different topics across the board.
Yeah, indeed. I think that's why it's called Open Source Summit. And in the end, right, it tries to gather like everything from the open source world, which, as you mentioned, goes from like super low level stuff to more high level cloud stuff, or even indeed policy making, compliance discussions, legal, and all, which on one side can be interesting because it means you bring like all the people in the same room, more or less. But on the other side, it means that the conference is huge, and it's not necessarily easy to find people to connect with who are like working in the same space as you are, I guess. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, what that also means is that you have multiple tracks at the conference itself, and so you get to pick and choose. But yes, finding the right partners to talk to can be a bit tricky, especially when you haven't been in the field for very long. Luckily, I had lots of people to talk to in my Bootlin colleagues, for instance, and the people they were acquainted to.
Okay, and so Theo, what did you think? For you, it was by far not the first. So kind of what's your feeling about this particular edition?
Yeah, so it's been 3 years since I've been in the embedded Linux community and world. It's always been interesting to join these kind of conferences. I see what Olivier means by scale and by policies. Let's just say it's different conferences for different people and different goals. OSS brings many different people, and that's what you come looking for. Some people prefer sticking with ELC conferences, but then you can go to Zephyr talks and listen to other OS discussions, which is nice as well. I've always enjoyed it. It was sometimes hard to get to know new people when you feel like the community is already kind of built out and a bit older than I am. But I've seen some fresh blood as I was a few years ago, and that's really nice. And I think the community knows how to welcome them. So that feels nice.
All right, good. And indeed, this year, the ELC, which is the Embedded Linux Conference that took place under the umbrella of the Open Source Summit, had a bit of a special format, kind of reduced, right? It is normally 3 tracks over 3 days. But this year, for various reasons, not entirely obvious, it was reduced to just 2 days and 2 tracks, which kind of limited quite a bit the choice and the number of talks that we could see. So what did you think about that, Theo? You attended like the same conference last year, so you could probably compare to how it felt the year before.
I'm not the kind of person to go to the US much, so I'm been happy that I had an event to attend to, organized by the ELF around the embedded Linux world. I do feel a difference. I mean, the choice of talks is smaller, the duration is shorter as well. It doesn't affect the quality of the talks there, but it does affect you going to a place for something like 2 or 3 days, and a kind of feeling of you needing to optimize your time because there's only going to be 2 or 3 days, and you don't want to miss any of it. So if you get a little tired during the afternoon, then it's too sad. You still need to keep on going because you don't want to miss some talk by colleagues or other teams.
All right. Yeah, I agree with you on the kind of this need to have find some, let's say, efficient use of the time spent there. I agree with that. So to kind of dig a little bit more, I asked you to pick a few talks that you found interesting. And so I think, Olivier, you had picked, the talk about USB, I think. Could you share a little bit about like high level, why you found it interesting, what it was all about, and yeah, why you picked that talk in particular?
Yeah, so this talk was about the support of USB-C in mainline Linux. And it also spent a bit of time on the various interfaces within the kernel to handle USB-C devices. What I found very interesting about it is that it really takes you through the history of the USB standard, the design of the connector that I admit I really like. I've always been very frustrated with the USB-A port and all of the micro variants of USB. This one is symmetrical, so I particularly liked it for this. And the description of all of the pins and what they're used for in the different circumstances. So usage of the super speed lanes in like alternate modes and then in accessory modes, I found that really interesting. And linking that to the kernel code was also a good way to sort of get into a subsystem that I guess most people, at least I didn't know about, and I would guess a lot of people don't necessarily interact with on a daily basis. And then I even sort of looked a bit at what was possible with this, and I have to say I find the idea of an alternate mode with debugging over USB-C really cool. So there's a hobby project called Minnow that you're showing right now. That is a small card that enables this for devices that, of course, have this capability built in. And yeah, DAM is this debugging alternate mode. I just find that really cool. Accessory mode, sorry, not alternate mode.
How does that work? Can you explain how this is all working?
Yeah, basically some of the pins on the USB-C connector will be reused to communicate to JTAG. I mean, it's either going to be JTAG or SWM over the interface, and you can then just use those pins as you would use those JTAG pins normally. Whether it's going to be symmetrical or not, it depends on the actual implementation in the hardware. So you might lose that perk of USB-C. There was a previous implementation of this. Minnow has kept that in, but there's a previous implementation of this, the USB serial, that actually broke the symmetry. So I was a bit sad about that. But yeah, that's very basically, that's how it works.
So basically, this Minnow board is it's a breakout board that like allows you to access the JTAG signals that go through the USB-C plug and then connect like your usual JTAG probe on I guess this top side connector. Is that
exactly
how it works? Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so
that's one usage of it, exactly.
All right.
Yeah.
Looks good. Interesting thing. And by the way, all the talks from the Open Source Summit are all already available. I would like to show you the playlist if that lets me. Yeah. So yeah, all the videos of the talks are already available, including I believe that one and all the talk from Open Source Summit. So if you're looking at visualizing some of the talks that we've discussed or just explore the schedule of talks, yeah, you can already do that. Yeah, thanks. I think you had selected another talk that you wanted to present a little bit, kind of trying to wonder which one it was.
This one's about DMA.
Yeah, not sure where it was, but I'm sure I will find it. It was about DMA. Yeah. Taming DMA.
Ahmed
yeah.
Fatum's, exactly.
Yep, absolutely.
Taming DMA. So this was a really cool talk because it's another very close to the metal topic. So that's another tale of this is something, a concept that is called leaky abstractions, where you abstract away the hardware into the kernel or the hull, and then you build on top of this more and more layers of abstraction. And this shows you very clear examples of where this abstraction breaks down because the hardware behaves a tiny bit differently from what you expect. This was particularly interesting to me because quite a few of the problems in this, mentioned in this talk, come from cache coherency, which is not a problem that you're necessarily used to dealing with on x86 platforms, which is sort of the background I kind of come from. But it is very important on ARM because not all cores necessarily have cache coherency, and they don't necessarily, devices might still implement it without the CPU knowing, which is one of the issues that were described, like the TFTP transfer in Barebox is one of the examples that he gave, where the first transfer was always corrupted because of the cache lines being still dirty, and when they were to be evicted, they would be written back, corrupting the packet that had just been written by the device. So I thought that was a really cool talk. The only if you can call this a problem with this talk, is that Ahmed did not have the time to go through all of his examples. So we have to go through the slides to find all of them.
Yeah, and I think his talk was the last of the day, so a lot of people in the room were like, "Yeah, you can go on. I mean, there's nobody after you, so you could just continue." Because Ahmed is a great speaker. I always enjoy attending his talks. Really, really great stuff. Low level stuff. Clearly explained that's really good stuff. So I do recommend the talk. I kind of agree with you on picking that talk. Yeah,
And then
good. Thank you.
the Yu-Gi-Oh cards were the cherry on top of the
Yeah.
of this very nice Sunday.
All right. Yeah. Thank you for picking those two talks. I'm gonna turn to Theo now. You also picked some talks, I think. Yeah. And the first one you picked was the one from our friend Stephen Boyd, working on clock and power.
Yeah.
So, what was said in this talk? What made it interesting to you? I guess the PM aspect of it made it interesting to you, but maybe you want to share more.
Yeah, that's right. So I'll just start by saying that I love the DMA talk as well, and the goal is to encourage people to make these kind of talks. When you have technical content that is interesting inside your work, just please share it with us, and so that we have fun together. So Ahmad made a great talk, and we want more of it. So this one, the SoC power management driver aspect of things. Basically, when you write a driver for embedded Linux, you often have resources that you acquire and that you enable, disable whenever you need that device. So we can think about clocks, we can think about regulators. What else? Pin control, you might want to do some explicit configuration of it. Whatever. So that needs to be enabled and disabled. But when you think about it, is that really up to the responsibility of a driver that is responsible for one specific hardware block? Most of that code might be more integration specific into how this hardware is integrated into the SoC or into the board maybe. So that makes it hard to write drivers that work well across a wide spectrum of hardware. And so the question that is being asked by Stephen is, could we not use the existing abstraction of power domains and create sort of virtual ones that reuse the resources that are defined in device tree and enable them automatically using stuff that we already have, which is runtime power management. So for those that don't know, power domains are implicit. Whenever you use runtime PM, your power domains will be turned on and off. So that's kind of the magic of the Linux kernel. It works pretty well on platforms that do use those, but we might want to use, for the moment, it's only been hardware power domains. So some TI SoCs use them a lot, for example. But you might want to define virtual ones that grab resources and enable and disable those resources. That way, you get the code that is integration specific for an IP block out of its driver and inside a SoC driver. So that's not easy. That can be quite challenging. Some people might even compare it to board files, which is something I've not known, but that might remind bad memories for some people. And so Stephen is well aware of all of those criticism. It's more of a discussion. I don't think there's even a proof of concept. It's just some lead that he wants to go into and look at. So that's really interesting to get talks about what the future could look like, how we can improve the kernel as it exists right now, and piggybacking on existing subsystems. The goal is not to invent 4 different new subsystems, it's really using existing ones for a good purpose. One last specific thing for this is that the biggest complexity, at least to my eyes, on a technical side of things, is how you keep your device tree to still be looking like a standard device tree. I mean, those kind of power domains don't represent any hardware. So you're not really supposed to add any new nodes. So you are supposed to keep your device tree as is and then reuse the resources that are attached to the different nodes inside your SoC. So that makes it really complex. And there are some good ideas which are exposed in the talk.
Yeah, so I think this talk was interesting because it's kind of a bit unusual as a talk for ELC. Normally, we more have talks like the one from Ahmad on DMA or the one on USB-C, which are more describing things that are already working and explain how they are working. This was more like an exploration, a discussion of possible ideas, which interestingly would probably have fitted better in Plumbers, right? And discuss Plumbers shortly in this podcast. So I think it was perhaps something fitting better in Plumbers because, of course, this is not something that is working today in Linux. This is not how things work, and this is more a proposal, an exploration, the start of a discussion, indeed. But speaking of PM and power management, you gave a talk to this conference on this particular topic. So can you briefly summarize kind of what your talk was all about and how it went and
yeah,
where
sure.
it's come from?
So for some context, so I've been in the domain for 3 years, and I thought at one point it might be the right time to hop into the speaking world, get some stress when you get to conferences, and do some part of what you enjoy. Well, you enjoy when other people give nice talks, so it's maybe your turn at one point to give some talks as well. So that was my state of mind when going into that kind of project. And I've been involved in a Suspend-to-ram project for TI-SoC recently, and I spent quite a bit of time on that. And when you get started on power management, you think, oh well, it looks easy. I mean, the APIs are pretty straightforward. If you want to go into system-wide suspend, you just implement suspend and resume for all your devices. Well, that's pretty easy, right? And so the first step is to learn the APIs and how the kernel is structured. The second step is understanding all the limitations that the current approach has, and now you might want to work around that. So my goal is really to talk to me 2 years ago, thinking that he knows enough about power management, and then discovering that he does not know enough.
Interesting approach, and I think I like that. And I know with all my colleagues here at Bootlin, and you yourself included, right? I've always encouraged those talks about like knowledge sharing, like things we have learned and we wished we had knew before, or be explained in a clearer way, or resources that were missing to help us ramp up on a particular topic. So we've done that many times at ELC, and every time those talks get some really good feedback because people are missing this kind of like, that I don't know if it's entry level because it's still on a fairly like precise and specific topic, but like something to get into the topic and get a clearer picture of how it all works. And I think your talk it fits very well in that big picture. So that's great. Thanks for that. And then you had a final thing that you wanted to highlight, which was the Linux wiki buff. I was kind of surprised you wanted to highlight that particular bird of a freezer. So maybe first we can explain what a buff is for our attendees who might not be familiar with what a buff is, because that's kind of a strange name.
If you expect me to explain what a buff is, I think I will have a hard time.
Okay,
I can explain the experience of it. I'd say you get into a room and then discuss with people. Don't expect the speaker to lead much the discussion. And just expect people to interact. So be ready to raise your hand and ask questions. Maybe feel somewhat dumb when you ask those questions, but other people in the room will grab onto your questions, and then you'll get a discussion running for 40 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the idea. That's a discussion-oriented session, right? The speaker typically has like almost no slides or barely any slides, and it's just there to like kickstart discussions, thinking, brainstorming with different people. I guess in the startup nation we would call that like brainstorming these days, but we call that bird of a feather. And so you decided to highlight that one in particular, which was not very technical, right? I was there in the room, so I could also experience the session. So why did you pick that one?
I think it highlights well the community aspect of what we work on. We might be thinking that Linux is rather generic, and we can talk to many people about Linux. Many other people work on the Linux kernel, but then they're not in that same community. And the community aspect of things is interesting to me. I'm curious about it. I want to know more about the history behind that. And the elinux.org website feels like a great resource to highlight. I'm still not sure what to expect from it, which is weird. And that's why I wanted to highlight it. I went to this buff to learn more about it, and what I discovered was a few people that wanted to contribute. They weren't sure what to contribute onto. They had some funding discussions as well, which was kind of interesting for a wiki, which is not something you find often. But they were ready to put in the methods to maybe get a useful wiki. So it's still unclear where it will head onto, but it has useful resources and it can bring some more.
Yeah, indeed. So I think I like it that you picked it because that allows us to highlight the Linux wiki during our podcast, right? That's a wiki about all things embedded Linux, which, as can be seen, is organized in portals by topics. So there's lots of contents there. Like many wikis, it's not always like amazingly well organized, but there are lots of resources. Including all the presentations, slides, and videos of past Embedded Linux conference for the past, 10, 15 years. So there's a lot of content there, which is still relevant. Sometimes even talks from 10 years ago can still be relevant today. So yeah, feel free to explore that. If you're in the Embedded Linux space, that's a great resource. And it's a wiki, which means you can contribute, you can fix it, you can extend it as well. And with that said, I think it's time to wrap up our first section on the feedback on the Embedded Linux conference. Perhaps we can just highlight. I will repeat it at the end. The dates and location for the next edition. Right, it's always good. So the next edition of Open Source Summit Europe, which should feature an Embedded Linux conference Europe internally as well. And this time it should be back to the normal 3 days, 3 tracks, or at least I'm hoping. So it's going to happen end of August, which is somewhat unusual. Years ago, the ELC was more like October timeframe. Then it ended up like being mid-September, and now we're end of August, and it's going to be as written in Amsterdam, Netherlands. So you can already save the date as written on that promotion page if you are interested in attending. And with that said, yeah, thank you, Olivier and Theo, for having been around with us. And then we'll switch over to our next section. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. See you next time.
Bye.
And let me bring in Maxime and Luca. Hello, Maxime. Hello, Luca.
Hello.
Hey, yeah, audio is working. Amazing. That's great. Well, thanks for being around. And in our second section of this podcast, we spent a little bit more time, a few more minutes than expected on the first section, but not too much. So that's good. And we're going to talk Plumbers. So this year was busy in Vienna, right? We had Open Source Summit on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then Plumbers on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So that made for a really busy week. I know you two guys only attended Plumbers, but a few others like me attended both. So first, what is Plumbers? Maxime, maybe you want to give us some ideas on what Plumbers actually is, because it's quite a unique conference.
Yeah, indeed. Compared to ELCE or ELC, the goal here is not to come with something you want to demonstrate, something you have done and you want to show to the community. The goal here is to discuss ongoing problems, discuss plans for the future, really when it comes to kernel development. So you have a lot of different tracks that we call micro conferences that last for half a day, 1 day. And in all of these tracks, you have very short topics, like half an hour to present a problem you're facing, to present something you are working on, and get feedback and discuss. So the goal here is really to discuss. You just spend maybe half of your time showing the problem, and then you start interacting with the people who are in the room, who usually are people who are very knowledgeable about the topic itself, to get things moving on, basically. So the main goal, as one of the organizers says, is that a few weeks from now, we start seeing discussions on the mailing list that starts with, as we discussed at Plumbers, here is my solution for the problems.
Good. Great. Thanks for that introduction. I think that's a really great explanation of what Plumbers is. And so, Luca, I don't remember if it was your first time attending Plumbers or if it was, or if you had already attended in the past. And what did you think of it?
Well, I attended Plumbers several years ago once, but it's the very first time I was also presenting something. Well, not presented, but proposing a discussion, as Maxime said. Yes, I agree. Plumbers is a very special kind of conference because you don't go there to give information, but to get answers in a short sentence. And actually, that's what we needed for a large project we're working on here at Bootlin with some colleagues, which is well, not only large, but it's also breaking several long-lived assumptions in the Linux kernel. So we have a device we're working on for a customer that has a hot pluggable part, and this is not using the usual hot pluggable buses like USB or PCI, but it's using I2C, MIPI, DSI, and other buses which are not meant to be hot plug. So everywhere in the kernel there are assumptions that these things will never go away, and we are breaking this assumption. So this is touching many subsystems in the kernel, I2C platform, DRM, GPIO, and so on. And it's breaking assumption in many of them. There is no obvious solution to this. It's not just adding yet another driver. It's really modifying some core mechanisms that are in the kernel since a long time, hopefully without breaking working use cases. And so we already proposed solutions with patch series already sent in the past months, but some of the topics really needed to be discussed. And well, discussions via email are okay, but they tend to take a long time. So Plumbers were really perfect for this. I proposed 2 different sessions in hope that at least one got accepted, and both got. So in the end, well, I had these 2 discussions, one about Hotplug in general with S3 overlays, and one about the DRM aspects. And those were very useful. But I found even more useful the hallway track, as it's called. So meeting people outside of the rooms and continue the discussion. We had an entire lunch break with a very experienced kernel developer to discuss on a specific topic that is problematic for us. So it was very productive in that respect to discuss the topics technically, and also to meet the people, understand the people. So later on over email, it will be easier to understand each other.
Yeah, and I think it's indeed about understanding the people, but also about getting people to understand the problem you're trying to solve, right? For some complicated problems like the one you're trying to solve with this hot pluggable hardware with a lot of non-discoverable buses. I mean, the problem can seem a bit strange, weird to the kernel developers, kernel maintainers you work with, you interact with in the community, and getting the chance to give a talk that explains, okay, this is what we're trying to solve. I guess helps the other people you interact with to understand what you're trying to do exactly, right? Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. So when you explaining something personally and maybe gesturing, because I'm Italian, I gesture all the time, and I'm drawing on paper. It was really immediate to transmit something. And when you see the other person saying, so that's what you were meaning, and after 10 minutes instead of 10 emails.
Yeah,
So
or more than 10 emails, right? Sometimes more than 10 emails, right? If it was only 10 emails, it would still be fine. All right, good. Yeah, thanks for that feedback. Let's move back a little bit to Maxime, who kind of, I think, started the discussion at Plumbers, because you were speaking on the Thursday, on the Wednesday. You're more on the networking side of things, so can you kind of share a bit of feedback on what problem you're trying to solve, and what did you get out of this? And I think it's actually the second time that you presented about this topic. You already presented a year before on a similar topic, so kind of, what is the goal of presenting 2 times the same topics? Is there any progress in between?
Yeah, so this is one of the topics I've been working on lately. It has taken quite a lot of my time. As you said, I'm focusing on networking aspects of the kernel, and I work on embedded devices that has some weird, if you can say, hardware design choices. You can think of it as weird from the get-go, but it turns out that it's something that is actually pretty common. It's when you have a device that has an Ethernet interface, but that Ethernet interface comes out of the device in more than one port. So instead of having just one RJ45 connector, for example, you have one RJ45 connector and alongside it an SFP cage. And so that you can choose which one you can plug into, and it actually goes to the actual same interface. So that's the big picture that I presented during the Plumbers talk. I already talked about this topic last year in the NetDevConf, which is a specialized conference related only to networking topics in the kernel, to discuss the internals of that, especially one specific case, which was having multiple Ethernet PHYs, one driving each port. As of today, the state of the art in the Linux kernel is that you assume that you have just one port connected to one device. So how do we improve on that? How do we make so that the users, the persons who are going to configure the system, know that there are more than one port and select which one to use at runtime? And so all of these new class of use cases that you get with these devices. So what I wanted to achieve here is to first of all let people know that these use cases exist. And this is not the first time I've got this feedback. I got the same feedback at the previous NetDev, but some people discovered that they were in the same use case and the same situation, and they thought that their product was unique and that they would never get that product supported upstream. It turns out that a lot of people use exactly the same configuration, and we could use that work to try to support all of these use cases that are in the end the same thing. So that was one of the first thing I wanted to achieve for me, to see if this was something that was only relevant to me or relevant to other people, and for other people to know that this is something I'm working on. And the other aspect would be, while we are doing that, we can use that occasion to improve a lot of things in this exact link representation. Assumptions that we have used so far about the nature of an Ethernet interface, like most of the time we assume that it's a copper interface, it's a RJ45, but it's not always the case. Sometimes it's a fiber interface and so on. So try to break down all of these assumptions that I was going to deconstruct in the work, and see if we can use all of these individual pieces of the work to improve on other people's use cases. So here my goal was mostly that, to present what I am doing, what I am working on, and if other people are going to be interested in that or not. And it turns out that yes, some people, after attending the talk, they reach out to me and say, okay, I have a device that has a similar topology, or I am interested in that because I also have that that I am working on. And that for me was the main success of that. The other thing that I think was nice is that the audience in the networking track is not necessarily focused on embedded devices. Most of the people who drive the networking work in the Linux kernel, they come from the server world, and they know very little about the lower level aspects of the networking stack. So it's also a good occasion to discuss these kind of topics with this person who drive the community and express our needs and what we are also working on.
So it's interesting what you're saying about the feedback that you got, because I did attend your talk. Of course, you were speaking, so I was there, and there were a few questions at the end, but not so many. So I think what really happens is that most of the feedback you actually get it in the hallway track, which
Yeah.
Luca was mentioning, right, during the social events, right after the talk, but in the hallway. So it's like more informal discussions going on, which are actually the biggest part of Plumbers. And so we had a question from an attendee here saying, is there a way to see the output of Plumbers discussions? And I think there are the video recordings, of course, which are available. They're already on YouTube. So for now, they are uncut. It's like a large stream of 8 hours for the entire day. You can just forward through it to find the interesting piece. But the thing is that at Plumbers, I think the value really comes out of all these informal discussions, which of course are not recorded anywhere. And that's where the value of Plumbers really comes from. The formal discussions are relevant, but there's at least as much happening in informal discussion, at least from what I've seen. Is this something you agree with, Luca, for example?
Yes, I do. At least for the two sessions I led, there was discussion during the session itself, but there was much more afterwards in the hallway. I don't know the reason. Maybe people are shy, or maybe just the time slot is not enough to continue the whole discussion. At least in my DRM discussion, it was a lively discussion during the session, but it was definitely not concluded. So we continued in the hallway and also the following day. So it's yeah. I don't think there is a perfect solution to that, except attending the conference in person.
Yeah, at least what I saw more as a person like managing the different projects here at Bootlin, I realized that many of you and several of our other colleagues were able to like talk to the right kernel developers, the right maintainers, to get feedback, to get attention on the topics you're trying to solve, and kind of push things further in a way that would have taken like many emails on the mailing list, or even wouldn't happen ever, due to how difficult it can be to understand each other. For example, Maxime, you mentioned like the fact that in a networking community, there's kind of a strong bias towards like server data center topics, and a little bit less so on the embedded side of things. But also that happens in other communities where topics like this hot plugging hardware is a little bit unusual, and people are not necessarily familiar with what we're trying to solve, and therefore being able to explain what we're trying to do and for what reason makes a lot of sense and makes future discussions much easier. So maybe now, Luca, you kind of already spoiled a bit your topic, but can you kind of say more about what you're trying to solve with this? I know you talked about device tree overlay. How does that fit? What is the idea there?
Yes. So the starting point is really the hardware, which is summarized in the picture. So there is this connector in red in the picture. So there is a device on the left side with the system on chip and a bunch of peripherals, which works like a pretty standard embedded Linux system. It's ARM based, so it's using device tree to describe the hardware. And then there are multiple add-ons that one can connect at any moment at runtime to provide more features to the device via more peripherals. And well, since device trees are used to describe the hardware here, it looked natural to use device tree overlays to add tell the Linux kernel that there are new devices. So device tree overlays are existing since a long time, but applying them at runtime is somewhat new and somewhat old. It is the code to do that is implemented in the kernel since a long time, but it's not exposed in any way except in unit tests. So nobody really used them with the mainline kernel, and even though I have proved that a lot of people are using them with out-of-tree patches in the industry. But when using them, a lot of problems start happening just because it's some untested, unsupported scenario. There are some problems when inserting a device tree overlay to describe new hardware, but way more problems when you remove hardware and then you remove an overlay. So first thing, it would be nice to remove the overlay before the hardware, so you clean up everything and then remove, like when you remove a USB drive from your computer. But it's not an option in this case because the product needs to be able to allow to remove the hardware at any moment. It's used in the healthcare, so maybe in an emergency, whatever, so people don't have time to click on I want to remove my add-on board. So that's a first issue. And then even without that, removing overlays opens a lot of issues because there is a whole list of devices which are not supposed to be ever removed. One is I2C. So I2C is not at all designed for hot plugging. And when removing, lots of bad things could happen. And another one is my PDSI. In general, all the video, all the display pipelines in Linux implemented by the DRM subsystem are supposed to be completely fixed, except for the very final part, which is the panel, the video, so you can disconnect your HDMI monitor, but not the previous components. And in this case, we have a DSI to LVDS bridge on the removable side. And this has opened a huge can of worms because we have to change a lot of things that are there since a long time, a lot of assumptions. And that's probably the biggest part of the project.
So that was, I guess, the topic of your other plumbers discussion, right? Because you mentioned you had two, right?
Yep.
This particular focus on the DRM side of things. So what was kind of the key takeaways of the conversation you had there? I know you had some challenging conversation there, and so
Yes.
kind of what did you get? I know you have a working prototype for this work. What feedback did you get about this prototype that was proposed on the mailing? Because I think that's also one point of Plumbers, right? It's not discuss ideas like up in the air, but like we are working on this. Here is some initial proposal that people can look at and touch, and then discuss it. So you have posted that those initial proposals. So what sort of feedback did you get?
Yes. So I'd say two main types of categories of feedback I get. One is that there is a lot of assumptions, as I said, in the DRM subsystem, that the hardware is never going to disappear. So especially the DRM bridges, in my specific case, are not supposed to be removed at any moment. They are part of the video card, and removing them requires to handle their lifetime. So various parts of the kernel can take a pointer to a DRM bridge and keep it for an unspecified span of time. That would not work when the bridge itself can be removed, because the pointer would become a dangling pointer with all sorts of possible explosions in the kernel. So the discussion highlighted something that was already mentioned in previous emails. So we need to introduce ref counting to manage the lifetime of bridges so that they are not deallocated too early on physical removal. And so this is one part of it. And another aspect is related to our specific design, which is based on introducing a new DRM bridge, which we call the Hotplug bridge. This is not representing a real chip, but it's basically representing the connector. It is there to decouple the previous and the following bridge, so that the previous bridge never realizes that anything is being removed. It always sees the following bridge and is always happy, while the following one will be again connected to the Hotplug bridge itself, which decouples everything. However, this approach was not necessarily declared as totally wrong, but it was
not totally right either.
Not totally right, exactly. So it not considered a clean design in some way. So the request was that we basically allow the previous bridge, the last bridge on the fixed side of the hardware, be aware that the following component could disappear and be able to handle it disappearing gracefully without having any use after free on the following bridge or whatever. And this is one other aspect which will become possible after handling the lifetime of bridges, and also other aspects that I haven't mentioned, like properly handling the atomic mode setting when a component is being removed, which is another challenge we are going to face. It's the following one on the to-do list.
All right, good. Yeah, thank you for this feedback. Maybe to wrap up, kind of, to whom would you recommend attending Linux Plumbers and whom you would recommend not attending? It's quite a unique conference, so I guess it's not really targeted at everyone and anyone. Like, what do you think should be the people who attend Plumbers, Luca?
Definitely the people who should propose a talk, a discussion, are people who are trying to solve a complex problem that is opening some new challenges. So not just another driver, but like in this case, something that's breaking existing assumptions, or that is there's a complex problem with no obvious solution. So come with some proposal, and with a very open approach, very open mind. Expect your idea to be criticized, but to do that in a creative and constructive way. So don't come to defend your idea, but just to challenge it. And other people should definitely be, well, maintainers, but they already know. So people who are very expert in a specific domain who can contribute to the discussions, and also anyone working on one of those challenging topics who can contribute. So like anyone who was working on Hotplug and was at the conference, participated in the discussion, provided some idea. So I think that's the main categories of people who should attend Plumbers. I would not recommend Plumbers if you are going to a conference to learn, because it's not the place to learn. It's a place to bring ideas and discuss ideas.
Yeah, I would say it's a fairly challenging conference to attend, right? The technical level is pretty deep, and people go fairly quickly deep into the topics. So it's really for, I would say, engineers who are already like in the particular topic being covered. I don't know if you agree, Maxime, with your feeling on that.
Yeah, exactly. It goes pretty deep into the details, the technical details, very fast. And even if you are actively involved in the various micro conferences or tracks, you will not understand all of the topics that would be brought up. But that's still a very good occasion to talk with these people who are involved, to give them feedback on what you thought about what they are doing, and also just meet them. It's a good opportunity to meet fellow developers who are working on complex problems, and maybe the technical issue that you are facing is totally different, but you are interacting with the same community, and in any case, it's really interesting to discuss with these people, regardless of the topic itself.
Right, and I think in both of your presentations or summaries of your topic, the two of you mentioned breaking assumptions, right? In your two topics, right? Maxime, you're breaking the assumption that you have an Ethernet MAC and an Ethernet PHY, and it's always copper. And then in the case of Luca, we're breaking the assumption that non-discoverable buses are always present, fixed hardware that doesn't get removed, that DRM pipeline are fixed for the entire lifetime of the device. So I think this is an interesting kind of common aspect of the two topic, right? It's the kernel supports a certain set of capabilities, features, and we're trying to support new things, and that breaks assumption. Then this is where things get hard, right? How do we support these new use cases without breaking everything that already exists, but we still need to break existing assumptions. So we need to break some of the existing stuff while preserving compatibility. So that's, I guess, part of the challenges that you're facing on those two completely different topics, but in the end have some commonality, right? The fact that they're breaking assumptions. All right. Well, I think that this is probably going to wrap up our Plumbers discussion. Thanks a lot, Maxime and Luca, for having joined us tonight for this conversation. And we'll see you next time, hopefully in another episode of Bootlin Live. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sure.
And to start our last session or last part of this podcast, I would like to welcome on stage again Theo, who already spoke with us.
Hello, I'm back.
Yeah, and also Franek.
Hello.
Hey, hello, Franek. How are you doing?
Doing great, thanks.
Yeah, so on this last part, I wanted to kind of give a little bit of a highlight on elixir.bootlin.com. So let me open it up there. Because quite some work has been ongoing over the summer on improving things on Elixir, thanks to work done by both of you guys. So I wanted to kind of see what has been improved, both on the user visible side, but also, let's say, the back-end less visible side of things, but still relevant to our users. So, but first, let's start, like, what is Elixir? I don't know, who of you want to kind of describe it and give some quick idea of what it is?
Okay, sorry, I think I can start.
Yeah, go ahead.
And yeah, to give like a short description, Elixir is a code browsing tool. It's currently focused mainly on Linux and other embedded projects related to embedded space, but not only. And yeah, for example, dboot. And in Elixir, you can easily browse the source files of these projects and switch between versions and look up identifiers used in these projects. So for example, let's say that I'm interested in IO Uring implementation in Linux version 6.10. So if you now select version 6.10 from the sidebar, you can switch that version, and you can now say go to IO Uring and like browse on a file, or begin by searching on an identifier in the search bar here. And there's a source file. And if you click on an identifier, you get a pop-up with information about where this identifier is referenced, where it's defined, where it's documented, and like what it is, for example, if it's a function or a macro or an enumeration. Yeah.
Sadly, this one is not documented, it looks like, so there's some work to do in the kernel to improve the documentation here.
Yes.
That's
but
not up to
somehow-
Elixir. That's kernel developers that don't document stuff.
Yes.
Absolutely, absolutely. But this one is not a documented structure. It doesn't have kernel doc apparently. Okay.
Yeah.
One last demo I think we can do is show that we don't have only identifiers in the code. If you go in the top, you have all symbols currently selected for the search bar, but then you can switch to maybe DT compatibles. That can be really useful. So do you know anyone off the top of your head, Thomas, or
Nope.
do you want one I can give you?
Yeah, give me one. Maybe ARM, Geek something. I'm not sure. Geek, yeah. Well,
You have autocomplete, so pick your own.
Yeah. So what do we have there?
So that's mostly documentation. So that is parsing the DT bindings, which is rather easy to parse. I mean, that's some YAML files, so it's meant to be parsed, and you can go to it and get some information about it. The other really interesting stuff is reading in what device tree it is being used. So this one is pretty common as it's used on almost all ARM platforms, but you can explore that this way.
All right, good. Thanks for this this quick intro. So that site has been a very popular resource provided by Bootlin for many years, right? I remember back maybe 15 years ago or something like that, we were using Elixir, but then that ended up being too slow, and a couple of years ago we started Elixir, a rewrite in Python, more Git oriented, to have a more like a faster alternative to it, able to index more versions of the kernel. So we really have like a fairly long history. I'm not sure. Yeah, it goes all the way back to like super old kernel releases.
I do have an anecdote from that. So at ELC, there are some social events, and I sat down at one table. I was the only one from Bootlin at the table, and I sat down, and the guy beside me looks at me, smiles, and tells me, "Hey, it's thanks to you that I learned Linux kernel development." I was surprised because I don't think he knows my name. I don't think I'm old enough to be his teacher. So I was curious, and he told me actually he learned the kernel source code by reading it through Elixir. Many years ago. I was probably not in the field, and yet he was thankful for that.
Yeah, it's a popular site, I think. Yeah. So indeed, over the course of the summer, we wanted to like push it a bit further. We had some issues in our bug tracker, well, like real issues to solve, but also like suggestions of improvements. And Franek, you contributed to it, I think, over the course of the since the beginning of the year or something like that on the GitHub project. And so we kind of formalized the collaboration, and you had therefore more time to spend on it over the course of the summer. So I'd like to maybe go through a little bit the improvements that were made. Could you, I don't know, either Theo, Franek, I don't know how you want to get started?
Well, I guess we'll do one after the other. We have a few rather long list, thanks to Franek, and we'll start with the beginning where Franek got involved. He was quite annoyed at having to click on identifiers. So if you reach any one page, kernel page, or you can go into the net subsystem if that's what you enjoy. At the start, when you clicked on an identifier, you had a new page that was opened. First work from Franek was this rather big change to add a pop-up that makes it much easier to browse and to find stuff, especially when you read code, you don't really want to context switch to something else. And so that pop-up can be rather useful. So that's one, the first feature we can cover. That's, I think, big usability for users.
Yeah, I agree. It used to look like a full new page, so you would like no longer see the code behind it, and it was like when you were doing back, then it would have to you that to do back 2 times and stuff like that. Well, it's much smoother now to navigate through function calls. So it's.
I think when you used to work in offices at Bootlin, you had maybe 50 tabs open at every desk of Elixir tabs, and that changed quite a bit since then.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, good new feature. Thanks for highlighting it. So Franek, maybe you have some other cool new feature?
Yeah. So like another thing that we have recently implemented is our links to ranges of lines, and we kind of don't know how to present it well in Elixir yet. but basically it works the same way that works on GitHub, for example. If you shift click a line and then shift click another line, this range shows up, and information.
And the links get updated, right? So if you share
Yes,
that with someone else, that someone else gets the exact same range of code highlighted. Yeah,
Exactly.
That's cool.
And you can modify the range by shift clicking and reset it by clicking on any other line number. Yeah, and that was one feature requested by someone on GitHub, so it's now implemented.
Yeah, very good feature. I think like these small usability improvements, but that are nice. But it's these small things that are kind of not easy to find, right, from a UI perspective, right? If you don't know that you can like click and do shift to like highlight a range, you don't really know it. So I think it was worth highlighting it.
It would be cool to like some tutorial or something, but I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Okay, good.
I must say I love those kind of small features that it's hard to know them, but once you know them and use them, you feel like a power user.
Yeah.
And that's not something you get on many websites, so I'm pretty happy we have that. Another feature we can cover is rather quick. It's just that on a desktop, we used to always have the sidebar, which can be annoying because sometimes kernel developers don't respect the rules of limiting the length of lines. And so that can be useful. That's a small trick, but it was quite some work to implement because when you don't think about it, it's easy. Then you start thinking about tablet mode, that is half-sized. Then you start thinking about mobile, that's another mode of the website. And then you combine those together and you get a sidebar that is rather hard to combine. So that's work done by Franek again that can be useful.
Yeah, it's nice. It used to be always present. No, it's kind of hidden by default because once you've selected the kernel version, most likely that's where you want to stay, or selected the project. So it makes a lot of sense. So that's a neat improvement. Again, small like UI improvement, but that I believe makes real difference. Yeah, good.
Yes. So another thing that someone on GitHub requested was an ability to download files, and now there's this little download file link in the footer. And if you click on it, the file gets downloaded, and you can now view it in your editor of choice. Or
nice. Again, small thing, but some people found it relevant, so implemented. Yeah, that's cool.
So some people can't download the 10 gigabytes of data that is the kernel and its Git repo.
Yeah, and maybe you're like looking at just one version of one file or something like that. Or some people may not be entirely familiar with Git yet, because I mean you could do that easily with Git locally, but knowing Git is still needs a bit of effort. So if that can help people get going, that's good.
I think the next feature is already covered. It's been enabled and active for a while. It's autocomplete. That exists for a few years now, but it's been disabled because of performance issues. That was throttling the server. So now it's back. Some small usability improvements because the interface was a bit outdated, but we think it's pretty useful. We have some plans to bring more to it, but we can discuss them later.
It's nice, really nice, really nice. So and it also works with, like, as we've seen before, with like compatible strings, right? So that's pretty neat. Yeah. Maybe it needs a bit of a scroll bar or something, or I don't know, so something to
you might risk asking too many identifiers if you just write A and then expect a result, or arms comma. That's maybe too much.
Too broad.
I guess we could do more than 10.
It would be doable.
Okay, all right, that would be interesting. Cool. I think that's a cool new feature too. I remember we had it some years ago, but in the server side was a bit too painful. But thanks to lots of work, it's now possible. Well, we think it's possible to leave it on. We'll see if the server can handle the load. All right, good. Franek, you had other features to highlight?
Yeah. So maybe not as much as a feature, but there were some problems with how Elixir handles errors, and sometimes if you, for example, type on an identifier that we currently do not accept, like something with a quote, it would display a rather unintuitive error message, and you couldn't easily go back to where you were previously. That's now fixed, and now the error messages are better. There's even a link to GitHub, so you can open a pull request or an issue if you think that this is an actual problem. So
we'll get
So
more
you are-
words now.
You are allowed to trigger an error during your demo, Thomas.
Okay.
And that's the goal of the feature. And if you manage to find a way, then we'll be able to see the better error page.
Okay, all right. We'll see how the demo goes then. Good.
Another feature, so we talked about it for link ranges. Elixir is also used to share links to code. That's a big use of it for our trainings, for example, at Bootlin. And there's always been this issue, at least that's been bothering me, that when you go to elixir.bootlin.com, you start browsing to some place and then you copy the link and give it to someone. It used to be that the link would be /linux/latest/source. And that's bad. That's bad because then the link that you provided to someone might get outdated and will probably be, because the kernel will be changing. So we've changed the handling of it to be whenever you load the page, if you go to latest, which is what you do by default on elixir.bootlin.com, then you get to the latest version. That's a small change, but that means every URL you reach is kind of atomic and that can be copy-pasted. So it works really well with line ranges, a good combination of features to use.
So it kind of makes the links like reproducible over time, kinda, right? It keeps them reproducible. So the same link brings people to the same place rather than whatever it is in a newer kind of release, which might not even exist anymore or be like completely shifted around or whatnot. So I think, good small feature, and it's totally transparent to the users, right? As you mentioned, they're no redirected automatically to this URL pointing to the latest kernel release or U-boot release or whatever other project. Cool. Then Franek, you had other features to highlight?
So like one last thing that was maybe not as visible to users, but we spent a lot of time on it, were like general performance and reliability improvements. So the first thing is that Elixir had some issues with downtime. There were like frequent short downtimes happening, and this is now fixed. If anyone experienced that, we are sorry, but now this shouldn't happen anymore. And I haven't like seen any downtime, any like visible downtime for the last month. So hopefully Elixir is now more reliable. And then another thing is that we have worked on performance. Elixir was rewritten from CGI to WSGI. This allowed us to cache some things on the backend more easily, and now the response times have gone down for many requests. We are still working on making Elixir even more performant, but there's something for a start.
All right. So while you're talking about like kind of the backend, could you kind of summarize in a minute or two like how Elixir works? Like what's the infra behind it? What's running? I know there's some indexing stuff going on, obviously some kind of database, interaction with Git, web server, kind of how it all works.
Sure. So like maybe starting from like how the request goes. So first it hits our varnish cache, and some things are cached there. So sometimes if you are lucky, you get a response right from the cache, and that's going to usually be very fast. Then it goes to our server. Elixir currently uses Apache with mod WSGI to handle requests, and then that's the request is handled by Elixir, and then like depending on what the query was, it either goes to Git, and then Git is the file is requested from Git, and then it's like parsed and tokenized to find all the references and fill in all the links to identifiers, and to basically colorize it with pigments, and then it like goes back. So basically like the major components here are the Elixir server itself, WSGI and stuff, and Git that holds all our data, and then some code in Elixir that like glues together Git and our databases with identifiers and pigments. And when it comes to updates, then there's simpler. There's an update script that runs twice a day, and it pulls new releases from Git. And if it's necessary, there are any new releases, the update is run, and it basically just goes over all new blobs in Git, runs syntax on them to extract definitions and information about macros, and also runs our own tokenizer to extract information about references, and that gets saved to our databases. We use Berkeley database to store that information.
Cool. Right. Great summary. Very, very informative. Thank you very much for the summary. And Theo, did you add other features to highlight, other topics?
I think now we can switch to our call for actions. We've been thinking about what we wanted to improve to Elixir, but we just want to mention that we are open to suggestions. I mean, we are a big user of Elixir at Bootlin, that's right. But we know we are not the only ones, and we expect people might have suggestions or might even have time to contribute for those. So our main direction now, I believe, and Thomas, you can add to that if you see some more stuff, is to add more projects and more languages support. That kind of goes hand in hand. The projects, we could add projects for existing languages. That's not too much work. It needs to be, there's work per project, but that's fine. Then you need to add more languages, and that's more work. Also to note is that some projects that we use, like the Linux kernel, do use new languages that we don't yet support. So if we talk about Rust, for example, we can show the code. I do not believe we index it really well currently. So we do need to focus on that kind of things. So it's kind of growing on the data that we collect and the way we do it.
All right.
That's the main thing.
Do you see other items on the roadmap other than like new languages support? Like more short-term items or things that you guys want to tackle?
Yeah.
Let's just say that whenever you index a lot of code, you handle many edge cases. So I think, Franek, you can talk a little bit about what we think about when we say that.
Yeah, so basically, like we are currently rewriting our old tokenizer. That's a sort of like one-size-fits-all tokenizer, and it finds references in all types, all languages basically that are supported by Elixir. However, the problem with this tokenizer is that it sometimes gets confused by certain syntactical constructs, and it doesn't support comments in, for example, kconfig files or assemble files very well. So I'm currently working on rewriting that and writing new tokenizers that will support all of these languages better. And then, of course, we are planning to update syntax so that like coverage of definitions is better. There are few macros that I know of that are currently not recognized, and as far as I know, this is because our syntax version isn't exactly the latest. So this is definitely planned, and yeah.
All right, good. Thank you. Any other words to conclude this Elixir discussion?
Well, I guess we have made some changes that we've not talked about, which is just on the backend code side of things. That can, I'm just mentioning it now because that can be, you might want to contribute now to Elixir now that the code is easier to approach. That's what I want to say. You can go into it, maybe report bugs at first, and if you do have features that you want to get, well, we'll look at them and discuss them with you.
Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning it because beyond the performance improvements and switching to WSGI, there has also been just some refactoring for the sake of making the code easier to read and more maintainable. I mean, that like most projects, right? It has grown kind of organically over time, and it needed some refactoring, which Franek took on. So I think, yeah, the code is probably easier to grasp these days than it was 3 months ago when Franek started seriously working on it. So. Okay, that's good. Well, I'm really glad that we could improve Elixir and that there are more improvements in the pipeline, and we're looking for call for ideas or even help in pushing Elixir forward. So, thanks very much, Theo and Franek, for these contributions and for your participation to this Bootlin Live. Thank you very much, and bye bye.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you. Bye.
All right, and I think this is kind of slowly bringing us to the end. I was planning on spending an hour with all of you and my guest, but it turned out to be a little bit more, not that much. So to conclude that, I would just wanted to highlight a few upcoming events in the coming months, or actually next year. First of all, I wanted to point out FOSDEM 2025. They announced their dates not long ago, even though it has always been happening the first weekend of February, but they finally made it official. So it's going to take place on February 1st and 2nd, as usual, in Brussels. If you've never been to FOSDEM, I really recommend joining. It's over the weekend, it's free. So even if you are, if you're in Europe, you should definitely attend, right? It's a really great and cool open source conference, entirely free. It has more than 500 talks on 40 parallel tracks. It's kind of crazy, the number of people, number of talks, number of topics covered. So warmly recommended. And of course, because it's Brussels, they have beer, they have chocolate, they have waffles, they have fries. So you should definitely join. I already booked my trip myself, I think over the last weekend. So you should definitely attend for sure. The next event that I wanted to highlight is Embedded Recipes. Last week, the Kernel Recipes conference took place in Paris, and Kernel Recipes and Embedded Recipes used to take place back to back, like Kernel Recipes the first 3 days of a week and Embedded Recipes the last 2 days of the same week in the same place. But for the first time next year, Embedded Recipe is going to be standalone, and it will move from Paris to Nice in the southeast of France. And it's a great conference. It has a quite unique single track format, so you get to only see one talk at a time. But it creates a more friendly atmosphere where it's easier to connect with people. It's a smaller event, much smaller than the Open Source Summit. So it's much easier to connect with people. So I also recommend keeping those dates saved in your agenda if you can, and make sure to attend as well. And finally, I'm gonna recap the dates of Open Source Summit Europe, which we already mentioned, on August 25, 27. And I'm gonna bring back, just for a final hello, all my guests and final thanks. So let me figure out how to do that. So bring back, let's hope they're still all around and in a shape where I can show everyone. Okay, let's do it like this maybe. Right, well, I guess that's the end of this first podcast. Thank you very much, everyone, for your participation, and I hope that we will have more editions in the future. We got a little bit of feedback on the YouTube channel, right? Some people saying great initiative. We also got some feedback on Embedded Recipes, where Philippe Dylan said, yeah, that's a great place to meet people. And yeah, we'll see how that first Bootlin Live went, and whether we need to plan a second one for the future. And with that, yeah, thank you, everyone. Thanks, Theo. Thanks, Maxime. Thanks, Franek, Luca, and Olivier. And have a good evening in Europe, or good rest of the day in different continents. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Thomas.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.